Hey, this is Jeff. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and join us at the table as we talk to another great leader about faith, church, and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Drip.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Drip. Man, we are excited about our show today. We have Alli Worthington on. She is an author, a speaker, a podcaster, full-time encourager, and her show is literally, I think, one of the best podcasts on the planet. So she hosts a conference for women focusing on business, faith, and living life well. And Alli, thank you so much for being on the show. We are so glad you are here.
Rob, I've got goosebumps. Like, she is podcast royalty. Like, I'm excited.
Jeff's fanboy over here. He's fanboying a little bit. It's great.
We've had some guests.
I don't see him sweat too often, but right now he's getting a little verklempt, if you know what I'm saying.
Verklempt. Going to SNL.
With an intro like that, you know we're going to have fun.
Oh yeah.
Alli, there's a rumor I want to clarify that in college you were a zookeeper?
I was. So when I was in college, the Knoxville Zoo made the crazy decision that they were going to give people without a degree, volunteers, access to animals. Like I was chopping ice blocks to feed the polar bear. I took care of the penguins. I took care of the giraffes. I have a scar on my leg from a mama penguin who thought I was going to try to get her eggs. I was not.
Oh my
goodness.
For
the record. Now you can't do that. Now you need to, be official, a scientist. But they let this crazy college student volunteer with the animals. I thought I was going to be a zookeeper for a living, but I learned in college. I had an idea before. I learned in college I was definitely not good at science, nor was I good at math. So my life went in a different direction.
So hang on. A mama penguin went on the attack?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Oh, yeah. And now imagine this. So I'm in a room. The room smells like ammonia. Like it's rough in there. I'm trying to clean out where they're living. I have a power sprayer. And where they're nesting with their babies, they're just in big plastic, like dog kennels.
Yeah.
And I'm just minding my business cleaning, and I never saw her. I really thought for a second, has someone shot me in the calf? Because I couldn't see anything. She just came out of nowhere, pow, bit me on the back of the leg and went back in to guard her babies. You don't mess with a mama penguin.
Well, that'll preach probably.
There are more leadership lessons in that story than we have time to unpack on this show today. Okay.
Mama penguin. I'm writing that down.
Mama
right
penguins.
There.
Okay. That is all. And right here in Knoxville, we're not too far from Knoxville.
Yeah.
We're just about 45 minutes kind of south of Knoxville, right here in Cleveland, Tennessee at the good old Lee University. So again, just what a great story. A zookeeper.
Listen, I got great scars, but none of them from a mama penguin.
No, me neither.
They're from dumb things I did.
Yeah. It's a good thing we weren't on YouTube like when we were younger, because it's probably bad. So anyway. So, Alli, you tell this story that God and Google is in anything is possible. So how did you get started with just those two assets kind of in your journey?
Well, after college, I got married and we had about 1 million children. So my husband and I have 5 sons. So I spent years and years just raising the kids and became interested in entrepreneurship and started studying. And in 2008, because of the recession, real estate was our downfall. We ended up losing our home and going through our savings and filing bankruptcy and spending a summer living with my grandfather, while my husband was sending out his resume to try to get a new job. And I just started Googling at McDonald's every day for the free Wi-Fi. How do you start a company? How do you start a business on the internet? And I joke that it was a laptop with missing keys, $42 in startup money in Google. And I learned just about everything that I needed to learn in those beginning months to start my first business. And that's the great thing about the internet and all the opportunities that we have right now. You can just log on and learn, most of it for free. You got to trudge through a lot of garbage, but when you're really looking to learn something and you're looking to expand your knowledge and your reach and where you can go in life, the internet's the best tool that we have.
So what was the first business that you got off the ground there?
I before then I had tried a few that failed, but the business that finally took off at first was a conference for female entrepreneurs and writers and speakers. And then I moved into building websites that I could sell. And before I knew it, because I was kind of early in on social media and
Mhm.
understood how companies would need to talk to people to be relatable. This is when Twitter was brand new. This is
Right.
Right.
2008, 2009. I ended up joining Intel on their social media advisory board and working with companies like Disney and Verizon because they were learning how do we actually communicate in a way that doesn't offend people in this new era that we're moving into.
Yeah.
Man.
So really, I mean, early on, it was like Twitter was just a broadcast. It was like just blah.
Hmm.
So so how did you bring sort of the element of communication to large scale business? Because I think this is important for leaders everywhere, because we want to get our message out, but oftentimes we're not very conversational in how we do it. So
Right.
how do we convey a message that invites people in instead of repels them?
I think the most important thing is writing like you speak, because the problem is I see copy because now I spend most of my time coaching people as a business coach, one on one, individual business owners. And they will show me something that when it's written, it looks okay. And I will get on a phone call with them or I'll meet them through Zoom and I'll go, can you read that out loud? And they'll read it out loud and go, that sounds terrible. And I'm like, exactly, because nobody speaks like that. We want to have our language be a little more flowery than it needs to be. And we really just need to cut to the chase to figure out if you have a product to sell, if you have a service that you want to promote, what do people care about? What do they need? Put it in their own language and give it back to them. That's the way we connect with people. It's not using corporate speak and the
Yeah.
kind of things that look good written down sometimes.
Yeah.
Wow. I think, for us, especially being on a university campus,
Hmm.
that's a really difficult balance to strike sometimes, because in the two worlds between academics and leadership,
Yep.
the ease is a little bit different, right? So
Right.
I think, yeah, even in my own leadership journeys, as I'm trying to wrap up my own doctoral program, still one of the greatest challenges I have in writing is writing academically, right? And teaching, speaking, leading in a non-academic way, and sort of trying to bridge those two realities. So for you, what has been sort of, is there a formula? Is there a mechanism? Is there a thought process that goes in sort of translating those more flowery, poetic kind of writings into more digestible pieces? Like, what does that process look like?
Well, it's funny that you should say that because uh, I will help my children with their homework, even the one that's in sixth grade. And sometimes I have to Google, how do I make this sentence complex enough? I've written 4 books and I don't know. Like I will occasionally help a child and the teacher will be like, the writing needs to be a little bit better. I'm like, I helped him with this. I feel like this should be okay. So I think that we sometimes, of course, we need the writing to be top notch. You're in an
Right.
academic
Yeah.
environment. You need the writing to be top notch. But essentially, to be able to broadcast in a way that people understand for the general public, if you're looking for a target market, you want to figure out, what can I boil it down to? What is the simplest version of this told in the language that an 8 to 10-year-old will understand? One of the goals that I have whenever I'm building a website or I'm creating language around a product, one thing I do with a website, for instance, when you want to get the language at a point where people understand, is I'll take a client's website that I'm reviewing. I will show it to one of my children. I'll show it to a 10-year-old and go, what does this company do? And then what button do you think you should push? Like, where should the mouse go on this
Yeah.
page next? What should you do next? And if an 8 to 10-year-old can't tell me those two things, you got to keep boiling it down to something very simple.
Yeah.
Here's who we help. Here's what we do. Here's what to do next.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's
And if
good.
we're really honest, there are 8 to 10-year-olds right now who could school us on technology.
That's very true.
Right? So I mean, it's not like it's simplicity, but it's also sort of the what what we call sort of the first native digital generation, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
your kids will never know what it's like to not have the internet or a
Yeah.
smartphone or some kind of digital
Yeah.
platform to work through. So yeah, that's pretty smart.
Yeah. Help us understand this, Allie. You've done a great job of holding intention somewhere, and maybe it's not even attention. Maybe we just feel it. Of faith and business, they often feel in opposition to one another, or on opposite sides of the spectrum. but you've been a coach and a mentor to so many in saying they really merge and come together. So how do you see that? Maybe not intention, but really how faith and business merge together into one stream.
Well, there is such a tension, especially for women. So if there's women listening to this podcast, they've felt it for sure. I started my career in the business world, then moved in to the ministry world, and then since then I'm balancing half ministry work, half business work.
Hmm.
But at one point, not as a speaker, my speaking agent, not the one I have now, but the one I had prior, I went to them and said, okay, getting a lot of women's Christian events, but I'd like to book more corporate events like I used to. And he said, oh, we can't do that for you. I
Hmm.
said, well, why? You book corporate events all the time. And he said, because you write books about Jesus now. So
Oh,
you're going to be too risky to business because women don't talk both business and faith. Not my speaking agent anymore, but it's that old. I wish him well, but it's
duly noted.
that old, yeah, it's that old school mentality of
Yeah.
if you're this, you can't be this. And I think because this is the first generation of people who are really working hard at this to
Yeah.
go, faith and business don't have to be different. They don't have to be separated. We don't have to bring Jesus into every conversation when we're working. I mean, I work with clients all the time that don't share my faith. It doesn't come into our conversations at all. They wouldn't appreciate that. But we do build a relationship and they see how I live my life, and that is impactful to them. But also, God designed work to begin with.
Yeah.
Our work is important because whatever desire he gives us, whatever dream he has us for what we're going to build or what career we're going to move into the future, that's God given. A lot of people start questioning, well, is this my desire and it's selfish, or is this a desire from God? And if our goal is to be an accountant and we're going to make sure we keep our clients out of jail because they pay their taxes, that's a good thing. We're helping the world. But if our desire is to be a professional gambler and move to Vegas, it might not be a God dream. Like it's
Right.
pretty obvious what's a God dream and what we're just hoping for ourselves. So whatever it is, God's created us to work. He will make the world a better place by partnering with us so we
Mhm.
can do that work. So there's no reason for it to be separated.
Yeah.
It's the idea that the only important work or the only work that makes God happy is in the ministry couldn't be more wrong, because God planned for someone to create a vaccine for polio. God planned for the internet. God planned for Amazon 2-day Prime shipping. Amen. He
Amen.
partnered with somebody to do it, and it's all important work because it helps other people.
And I think in our conversations on the show, which we focus a lot on young adults, young adult leaders, especially in the local church, but one of the biggest trends in ministry, especially, are young leaders with what some people call a side hustle, right?
Yeah.
This entrepreneurial drive
Yeah.
that especially exists in Gen Z. And so, on a different show we had with Adam Weber, we talked a little about the entrepreneurial spirit of young adults that's coming up into church, into ministry. And they're bringing sort of this ideology of both business and faith, which you're
Mm-hmm.
talking a lot about. So for a young adult on our college campus who is looking to incorporate or integrate business and faith, what are some of those key principles and how you keep those things sort of in alignment and in the right perspective, and how to balance the entrepreneurial spirit with not getting ahead of yourself and all those
Yeah.
kinds of things?
Well, I love that you asked that question. Just this morning, I was in the kitchen with one of my sons, and he said, "So, what is it that you do? Are you are you in ministry? And what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I do two things. So half my time is ministry work, half my time is business work. But I spend, a lot of my time in the business work." And he said, "Well, what's more important?" I said, "Well, they're both important." And I said, "But I make the money on the business side so I can do the ministry side."
Yeah.
And it takes pressure. I love the business side too, but that's how I support the family. That's how I keep a roof over our head, and I can do the ministry as well. Of course, we still make money in ministry because
Of course.
everybody has to eat and we all need shoes. But the idea of so many people working in the church, but having the side hustle or, writing or, I'm working with someone now who is a wonderful pastor, but also is kind of doing a drop ship company where she's able to build something on the side. It pays her bills. She's able to focus in on the ministry. And I think generationally, like I mentioned before, we are a generation that's doing this first. We're pioneering in a way that's never been done before. And when we realize that whatever our interests are, they're God-given interests. They don't have to compete against each other. Our work in our church, our work in our office, we don't have to take time away from that to be able to do other things on the side.
It's good.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And we've had other, and it seems to be, and maybe because it wasn't as accessible to us early on, but we've had other young leaders, Hannah Granowski. I don't know if you know Hannah, from Generation Distinct, and Carson Case. And it seems like everybody under the age of 25 or that in that age group, they are carving their own space in ministry and in business.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like to them, there's not a delineation, but it's all who God created them to be, which I think is part of the beauty of that generation. And I feel like our generation, and I'll speak for myself, maybe it was, they were separate. You separated them out. I went to work, I did ministry. And now I think there's a merger of those two things that says, hey, listen, God's gifted me with this. I can make it a resource and valuable to somebody else and provide for my family.
Yeah, exactly.
And so help us, and I know this wasn't part of the script, but this idea that as believers and ministers, we can make money, because there's an old adage or belief or thought that we were just poor preachers. So how do you help some of these pastors who have a side hustle or whatever they want to label it, come to a place where they can go, hey, it's okay to make a profit and provide?
Well, I mean, we can just look at people in scripture. They worked,
Yeah.
I mean, people have always worked. People have always had work to do. And when we put all of the pressure on, if we're working in the ministry, or say you're a teaching pastor at a church, it's not news to anybody that you're not going to be a millionaire from that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is it's hard work. It's good work. So why not be able to do something on the side that pays the mortgage and you don't have to worry about it? I think we've always had the example of work, and that work's good, and that we can do the ministry work as well as other types of work that financially pay for things. I mean, nobody, I think, who has a heart for the ministry is also spending time like, but how do I make $10 million this year? You know what I mean? It's more of, how do I help other people? How do I make sure the mortgage gets paid? And how do I pay off my student loans? You know what I mean?
Amen.
And I think that's a really healthy perspective.
Yeah. And I think in this particular direction, and I can't remember if it was Addison Bevere or somebody else we had on the show, but we talked a lot about secular saints, sort of this drive for people who are doing the evangelistic work of the church in their cubicles, in their offices, in their businesses, in their corporations. And I think part of what we're seeing, what I think God is helping us unpack, and I think it's a beautiful thing, is that we're realizing, maybe more than just lip service, that to be the body of Christ, to be the full expression of Jesus, hands and feet in the world, it's going to require us to learn to think and to function in areas and in arenas that we are perhaps not traditionally accustomed to. So I love this approach you're taking about faith in business, about faith in work. I mean, I think it's such a critical piece to not only just sustaining the church in the future, but really thriving now. And so I think it's such a critical conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And it's important because I think, like you said, as ministers, sometimes my grandfather was a preacher, and I think,
Same.
and in a church planter before church planting was cool. Like, it wasn't even, you weren't a church planter, you did new work, or you, like, by built a church, he literally built the church, like with the building with his hands, and invited some people for chicken dinner. But I remember often him having other jobs. Like, it was not an opportunity for my grandfather to publish a book or a study to offset that cost. And I think now, having that opportunity, it alleviates the stress and helps some of those ministers be free to minister more. And the church free to not feel like they have to, not overly provide, because I think a workman is always due worth his wage, but the strain of sometimes that of small churches and pastors and things like that. So I think that's important. What's a good starting point for somebody who, ministry or not, wants to get started in a small business and start creating income for their family?
Well, it's twofold. The first is where can you either provide a service or create a product? So what are you gifted at? Often we downplay our gifts, but it's what do people come to you for? Maybe it's you know how to do something better than everyone else. They go, oh, you're the guy who does this, or you're the girl who does this, or if you have a product to sell. So you want to identify first what you have to offer. Second, you want to identify what people will actually part with their money for.
Mm.
So if someone says, I have a dream, I'm passionate about this, I'm going to paint elephant toenails, and that's what God made me to do. That's great, but nobody's going to pay you for that. So you got to find that intersection of what you can provide and what people will pay money for. Once you get that, that's magic.
Mm.
But sometimes we forget that it's not just what we can do, but it's actually what people are going to be willing to pay for. What do they need? Whether and all needs come down to something that's going to help them, something that's going to entertain them, something that's going to help their relationships, something that's going to help them make money, education, products, or something that's going to help them be healthier. That's kind of the core drivers of product and service purchases, those things. And it can be as simple, like I said, as entertainment. I mean,
Yeah.
we've bought all the Jim Gaffigan series when they come out because we'll part with money because we want to be entertained,
So funny.
But there has to be a driving force. People have to wake up in the morning and go, I need this. I have a problem and I need to solve it with this, or I need this product. And if people don't care enough to take action about it, it's not going to be a solid business to go ahead and start. But the fastest, easiest way to start is always through providing services as opposed to products, because there's not a lot of overhead. You can, it's like a kid in the neighborhood. You can go ahead and start mowing lawns. Whatever it is that you can do, that's the quickest way to start the side hustle.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of transition over to your latest book, Standing Strong here. And in the book, you talk about a moment where everything kind of changed for you. You had this successful conference, and then you gave all that up. So kind of talk us through what happened in that moment.
God has this interesting habit with me of telling me when I'm done professionally with something. And it's funny because he often is more quiet when it's time to do something. He will kind of lead me in a direction. I'll get interested in something. Doors will open and I'll have to take that step to go through it. I'm not quite sure. But when I'm done with a certain part of my life professionally, he's very clear.
Mm.
Like he will say in my spirit, and I just know that I know you're done. Your time here is over. And I think that sometimes we think about our parents' generation or even grandparents' generation. You go to college, you get a degree, you work at a job 50 years, and then you retire and you don't change.
Yeah.
And now we're in this world where we may change our career 8, 10, 20 times, and it's completely normal. And for me, it's been fun to be led by the Lord professionally. If this is what you're doing, it's time. Well, I'll say it's fun now looking back on it. It's terrible in the meantime. It's the worst. In fact, it tends to take me about a year to obey him when he tells me to stop doing something. Like I'm like a middle schooler, like stomping my feet up the stairs, angry that I have to obey. But for me, it comes down to figuring out, do I want what God wants for me more than what I want? And do I trust him that the future is going to be as good as the past? Because that I tend to want to take things in my own hands and want to go, I have a great plan here, Lord. Thanks for telling me that it's time to do something different, but I'm good with this. And every time I'm terrified. Every time he asks me professionally to lean into something else, or that my season with something is over, I'm sure it's going to be terrible in the future, and it's always better than before because the best is always yet to come, but it's the worst in the process.
Mm.
That's so
I think that's a 7 trait.
Is it?
I think so, because I'm just like you. When I know it's cooked, it's over. Like, it's really hard for me to stay focused, generate energy, exude
Mm-hmm.
passion, invest
Done.
when God says it's time to go. Now, like you, scared to death of the what's next, but when it's done, it's done. So I think Allie and I have sort of this 7 thing going on. Jeff has a 2. Can you help us figure that
I
out?
wish I could, because I feel like there's been several situations in my life where, like Allie, it took me a year to not to hear the Lord, but to say yes to what He was doing. It was
Yeah,
like, "Hey Jeff, we're done," and I'm like, "God, hang on, one more thing,
I can
like
help. I can
one
help.
more. Let me give
But
one more
did you
message,
did
one
you
more."
say we're done today or we're done in
That's right.
general and I have a
Yeah,
little
That's
more
right.
time?
yeah.
Yeah,
That's how I feel about it, and so I think that's an important conversation just for anybody, because I think by delaying that, we delay the things of God. Like,
right.
where God's trying to move us. And listen, it's scary. Some of the things we've done recently, just they're scary.
Yeah,
Some of the steps we've had to make in starting this podcast. We thought nobody would come on. Like, I remember, like, we
that's a true story.
we have we're behind where you are, and there's a whiteboard, and I think we wrote guests, and we made a list of people we wanted, and then we go, how are we ever going to get them on the air? Like, we thought, like, we'll just have to have professors from the
Yeah,
university talk just to fill shows. So it's often very scary to step into the things of God, but I don't know how we come to the place of going, it's probably scarier in reality to not be obedient when He tells us to move.
mm,
Yeah,
Um,
because the obedience is the one recipe for success. I think
yes,
that we
yes.
think that the more success that we have, the more confident we'll become, right? But the key to confidence is going, I know I'm obeying God. I know He's got me. I know my future is secure and I don't have to worry about what's next because He knows.
So you strike that the key to confidence. You talk about confidence in the new book. Where does that confidence come from? How do we, I hate to say obtain it, but really lay hold of confidence so that we can make the decisions and steps that God's leading us on?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we think that confidence is something that we're either born with or not. Like
Mhm.
we have brown hair or blue eyes, and we either were born with it or we aren't. Now, to some degree, there are some people you meet that they're just confident. Like they've been
right.
confident since they were a little kid. They're walking around in diapers, just all full of themselves, right? But to some degree, confidence is a skill like any other skill that we learn. Just because we aren't naturally confident doesn't mean that we won't develop the skill of being confident in the future. And confidence only comes through taking action. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be hard. I mean, you think about it, when we're kids, we're walking around on wobbly legs, we're falling down all the time, and then eventually we get it. We don't just sit down and go, I'm just going to let my parents carry me around forever. But essentially, when we're in adulthood, we will try something, we'll not feel confident, self-doubt will creep in, and we'll go, I'm just going to plop down and let God pick me up and take care of me. When God's like, I'm going to get you across that finish line, but you need to put on your shoes and lace them up and start running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once we start going, once we take one step after another step after another step, it won't be so terrifying. And we'll look back and go, sure enough, I did it. That builds confidence.
Yeah.
What I find, and I believe you, and I've seen it, and maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just the day we make confessions on the show here, Rob. I've seen God do it over and over. Like, I've seen God say, Jeff, do this, step into that. God promises, God comes through. Why is it that we always get hesitant on the next thing? Like, when God goes, you're done here, here's the next thing. When I should be full of confidence because I've seen God do it, I go, I don't know, Lord. Let's have a conversation about that. So why do we get sort of fearful even when He's been confident before?
I do it almost every time. I don't know, because we're humans.
Yeah.
Because the enemy takes advantage of our weakness and whispers, everything's going to fall apart.
Oh,
God's
that's
always
true.
been there for you before, but what if this time, this is the time God wants you to suffer? I think that's what it is.
That's
And
true.
our desire for control, because man, we
Oh,
do love to
yeah.
control things, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's so true. And I think, man, this is such a critical conversation, because there are so many pastors, leaders, ministers, business entrepreneurs out there who sincerely have incredible ideas, incredible capabilities, gifted by God to them to do great works for the kingdom. Ephesians chapter 2, if we need to throw some Bible in there, right?
Well done.
Yeah. So if they exist, and yet they're so untapped, right? I mean, they're so unexpressed in the kingdom. And I think we pay the price for it. And so as a leader, I think part of our role and our responsibility, our job is to find ways to pull those out of people. And so again, putting you on the spot, what are some ways that you see leaders and you say, okay, you have this gift, or you can do these things, or you can create this service, or whatever the product is. How do you pull that out of people besides confidence? And we know that that's part of the journey, but how do you pull that out of leaders?
I think it's a mindset shift, because as Christians, we are terrified, with good reason, that we're going to be prideful. Right? We're terrified that we are going to be full of ourselves, or we'll develop the love of money, or we'll replace God with something else, and we're going to be dancing around worshiping a golden cow. I think that's everyone's fear, and with good reason. But when we realize that by not using the gifts and talents that are planted in us, it is actually hurting the kingdom, that God gave us gifts and talents for a reason, for him to partner with us to bring things to life in this world, whatever it is, whether,
Right.
like I said, you're an accountant or a teacher or a pastor, whatever it is, he wants that done. He gave it to you for a reason. And when we think about stepping out in our gifts and building the dreams that we have and doing all of those things, we need to ask ourselves, if I do this, does it make God happy, or does it make the enemy happy? Because when we step out and we have a God dream and we're moving forward, that is going to make the enemy unhappy. But when we play small and we hold ourselves back and we use self-doubt and we call it humility, that makes the enemy happy.
That's good.
Because if God's given us something to do and we don't do it, the enemy's over there laughing. And God's like, I've put this in you. Let's give it a try. Let's go for it. Trust me enough to step out. So sometimes it's just getting over the self-doubt that we have, and getting over the fear that if we step out in faith and whatever God is leading us to do, that we will turn into, horrible, prideful narcissists. But God has a way of keeping us in line.
Yeah.
Yes, he does.
He's not,
Yeah.
when we stay close to the Lord every day, he's going to make sure we don't get out of control.
Yeah.
He's got this.
So it brings up an interesting question about self-doubt, because I think we all wrestle it. What is our responsibility as a believer to wrestle out self-doubt? And what is God's responsibility in that sort of relationship? Because some of it is the fact that we just have these narratives of lies that the enemy gives us. And then God sometimes is involved in that, not in the lies, in helping us have confidence.
Yeah.
So what's the responsibility of the believer, and what do we need to depend on God for?
Well, I think whatever we do, we're depending on God for.
Right.
But sometimes we get I'm not trying to Jesus juke you, but sometimes we think they're like, yeah, thanks, John. Sometimes we're like, I'm just going to sit over here and wait on the Lord, because everything can change when he decides to move in my life, and I'll be ready. When the Lord's like, I really need you to work on this. I really need you to lace up those shoes and start walking. I'm going to give you the strength you need. I'm going to help change you on the journey, but I'm here to partner with you, strengthen you, transform you while you're moving. I think way too often we go, I'm just going to wait on the Lord. I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait till it feels right. I don't have peace about something right now. Sometimes not having peace is the Holy Spirit telling us to go. But far too often, I think we confuse feeling uncomfortable and stepping out of our comfort zone with not having peace, and then we just hold ourselves back.
Yeah.
Because anytime we try to learn something new, anytime we try to grow, anytime we try to step out, anytime we do anything, we're going to feel uncomfortable. But if we think that feeling of feeling uncomfortable is a sign that we're not supposed to do it, we'll just stay on the couch and eat Cheetos all day.
Yeah. And then you add into the equation the unpredictably impossible sort of control over the outcomes, right? So, I mean, I'm not a negative Nancy at all. And I apologize to all Nancys out there in the world. I'm sorry you got that connotation, but we can't control the outcomes of these adventures that Jesus wants to take us on. And that's not our job. It's not our call, but but the faithfulness, the obedience, the dependency, those things are what he calls us to. And I think if we can keep that as the primary focus, it doesn't necessarily ease the outcomes when they don't go our way, but we certainly does add meaning and value to possibly understanding the why behind the what. I don't know. Am I
Yeah.
making sense? Right?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Because
Yeah.
obviously the goal in business is to make money. You don't go into business to lose money, right? You don't do these side hustles just because you have spare energy, right? There's a purpose behind it. So when they fail, and as you said, you've had a couple businesses fail, and
I've
they
had
do fail,
magnificent failures.
right?
Yeah.
What can we learn from these things, right? And I think
Exactly.
that's part of the resiliency that we need to help create and build as we create disciples. So anyway, that idea of how do we handle the failure?
Yeah, I think that's an important conversation. One of the things, my wife's a teacher, and there's some research, and I can't listen. I'm not the teacher, so I can't quote where the research comes from. But she talks about one of the transitions in education is when they removed monkey bars from playgrounds, and that the kids had to listen. If it's a struggle, like the monkey bars are hard. Like if you're
Monkey
going to
bars are
cross,
hard.
and you're probably going to fall. But it was tied to this resiliency in the students, that the more they tried to perform on the monkey bars, crossing all the way, the more resilience it built up in them academically. And then when they removed the monkey bars, we quit seeing that resilience. It's an interesting study that there's something about the struggle that builds the resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Something about the difficulty and pushing through the difficulty to get to the other side that builds the resilience to know that I can do it again. But again, we had the conversation earlier. Like I'm the number one guy to go, I did that. God told me to do it. I don't know. Like, so I got to go back to those monkey bars and try to cross again. And we sit in an interesting place here on campus, Alli, where at Lee University, about 2/3 of our population is female.
Mm-hmm.
I know your son's at UTC, so if he needs a good woman, we've got him. So,
Amen.
but what would you say to the populace here, or young adults, young women everywhere, about this confidence and resiliency in pursuing the God-given dreams?
I think that it's very important to remember that what life looks like now, it will not look like that in the future. I think that we think there's this idea that you go to college, you pick your major, you get a job, your life is set.
Yeah.
God is going to change your life over and over and over and over again. So if you are listening today and there is something in your life that you don't like, and you're like, this is just who I am, the past is always going to be the future, know that God is a God of transformation, and know that in every season of your life, you're not looking for some big purpose that you have to figure out that's confusing. Our purpose is to choose Christ or not. And then if we choose him, love him, honor him, tell other people about him. Our calling is different in every season, that you have adventures waiting for you that you can't even wrap your brain around. But you can't let yourself get in the habit of telling God no, telling God that you don't have what it takes. You don't have the wisdom or the knowledge or the resources, because when you partner with him, he's going to bring it. We just need to stay open and not tell him no with our words and not tell him no with our actions. Because sometimes we would never tell him no with our words, but we tell him no with our actions by just staying still and not moving forward when he tells us to go.
Yeah.
Wow.
That helped me.
That's why she's in the Holy Trinity of podcasts.
Like, I'm gonna just take a moment and just take all that in right there. That was just like good.
Great. Now I've got a counseling session with Jeff afterwards.
That's why I pay you the big bucks.
Oh yeah. Awesome.
Alli, what inspired you to write this book, Standing Strong? What about this message did you feel needed to get out?
I didn't want to write this book at all. 2 years ago, I started praying about it, because I will ask God for every book, what's the next book going to be about? Some busyness, fear. And this one, he brought to mind a little part of a prayer my mom used to pray over me every night. She used to pray that I'd grow to be a great woman of God, strong in my faith and fearless as I face the future. So I pray, and he brings back the thought, great woman of God. And I thought, well, that's dumb, and didn't think about it anymore, if I could be that honest, because God is fine with me being honest. And a few weeks later, I was like, Lord, going to start writing again. What's the next one about? And he said, I already told you. And so I spent 6 weeks wrestling with this concept of, what do you want to tell women? What's going on? What do you want to hear? And it was this message of partnership, that he has great things for women to do right now in this generation, and that things were going to get hard. I didn't know what hard meant 2 years ago, but now as everything's unfolding, I'm like, oh, now I know exactly why you wanted that. Yeah. So I went on a journey of figuring out what God wanted to say to women in this generation, and what plans he had for them, and what encouragement he had for them, even in a season that was going to be a little bit tough.
Yeah, it's a great message. It's a great book. The book is Standing Strong. So it comes out. It's already out. So go pick it up, buy it, purchase it from Amazon today. Somebody created the Amazon today, so honor that person as well.
Amen.
Or
Amen.
Kindle, or
whatever you want to get it. Somebody created a platform to you to get this book and honor God with it.
That's exactly
it's a great book. So please go pick it up. We have one final question, Alli, that we ask every person who comes on the show, because we just like to know, and when we're on a college campus. What is one lesson you learned in college that did not take place in the classroom?
That it was not going to be my lack of knowledge or resources that would hold me back. It would be me that would hold me back. Mm-hmm. Because as a very shy student in college, I would often shy away from any new opportunities because I felt uncomfortable. So I had to learn to put myself out there and push past being uncomfortable, and push past feeling like I didn't have what it takes to join this organization, or to, reach out in different ways. That it wasn't that I needed all of the things that I thought I needed to do whatever God was calling me to do. It was that I just needed to stop holding myself back.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome. I'm telling you what, this has been a great show, great episode. I've got a lot of things to go back and review as well do you, Jeff. And so there's a lot of crossroads and a lot of things happening, but we have enjoyed you having you on your show so much. It's been a real joy to kind of get to talk to you again, and hopefully we'll get to see you again before the next Passion Conference or something like that. But
just up the road. She's just north of Nashville.
Yeah, I'm just up the road.
Just up the road, as you're passing through.
So her son's just down the road, though. He's in UTC.
Mm-hmm.
He has to come by my house in order to get to her son. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So exactly. That's how it works. We'll even buy the coffee.
That's exactly right.
You got it.
Absolutely. Alli, thank you for being on the show. And as we always like to say here at the Leadership Drip, you have a seat at the table.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, friends. Great to be with you.
Hey, friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Drip. We loved having you at the table for this conversation. Would you do us a favor and comment, rate, subscribe, and share on your social media? That way we can get this content to other great leaders. And stay connected with us on Instagram at the Leadership Drip, and on Twitter at Leadership Drip. And remember, you have a seat at the table.